At Oro 2-37 on the morning of November 18, 1944, Navy Ensign Robert Carlson crouched in the cockpit of PT-319, watching a Japanese sampan 180 yards away through the darkness of Ormoc Bay, his hand on a contraption his engineering officer had called a suicide device for 3 weeks. 24 years old, mechanical engineering dropout from Iowa, 0 confirmed kills against anything larger than a fishing boat. The Japanese had been running supply convoys through these reef-strewn channels every night, and in the past 10 days they had successfully resupplied their garrison on Leyte with enough ammunition and reinforcements to kill 73 American soldiers. Carlson's commanding officer had called his invention a waste of torpedo tubes. The other boat captains called it the stupid trick. When he had welded together the steel frame with its spring-loaded slug dispenser and reinforced ram assembly at the Samar boatyard in late October of 1944, the base commander wanted to know if this was meant for comedy or combat. Carlson explained it was for cutting fish nets. They laughed him out of the engineering shed. Carlson spent the next 2 weeks watching other PT boats fire torpedoes at shadows while Japanese sampans slipped through the coastal reefs where the big boats could not follow. He requested permission to test his device on a night patrol. 3 weeks later, in mid-November of 1944, a reluctant squadron commander told him he had 1 night to prove it worked, or he would be reassigned to harbor duty in Manila. The device weighed 42 pounds. The ram assembly added another 18 pounds. Standard PT boat armament included 4 torpedo tubes, twin 50-caliber machine guns, and a 37-millimeter cannon. Total weight, 4,200 pounds of weaponry. Carlson's device weighed 60 pounds and fired 12-gauge shotgun slugs through a spring mechanism that could be triggered manually. Lieutenant Commander Harris ordered him to remove the stupid trick and stick to regulation weapons. Carlson mounted it anyway. The PT boat squadron had been operating out of Samar since late October of 1944. The Navy had been supporting MacArthur's return to the Philippines since the Leyte landings on October 20th. The Americans had taken the beaches. They had established their beachheads, pushed inland through brutal jungle fighting, secured airfields, and established supply lines. But they had not stopped the Japanese from reinforcing their positions through the back channels of Ormoc Bay. The bay was a nightmare for conventional naval operations. Shallow water, averaging 12 to 18 feet at high tide. Coral reefs that could rip the bottom out of a destroyer. Narrow channels between small islands where 1 wrong turn meant running aground. Unpredictable currents that changed with the tide. Perfect terrain for small, fast vessels that could navigate waters too dangerous for destroyers or cruisers. The Japanese were using it, and they were using it brilliantly. Every night, convoys of sampans and small transports would run south from Cebu, hug the coastline where American radar could not track them effectively, and slip into Ormoc through channels barely wide enough for a fishing boat. The Japanese had mapped these channels over decades of peacetime fishing and trading. They knew every reef, every current, every safe passage. American charts of the area were incomplete at best, dangerously inaccurate at worst. Some of those sampans carried troops, replacement soldiers fresh from training camps in Japan or veterans pulled from other fronts. Others carried ammunition, crate after crate of rifle rounds, machine gun belts, mortar shells, grenades, medical supplies, food, spare parts for weapons and equipment. Everything a cut-off garrison needed to keep fighting. The Japanese garrison on Leyte was cut off by land, surrounded by American forces that were slowly tightening the noose. But as long as the sea routes stayed open, they could hold out indefinitely. And they were holding out. On November 10th, a Japanese convoy delivered 200 fresh troops and 4 tons of ammunition to Ormoc. American intelligence intercepted radio traffic confirming the delivery. On November 12th, another convoy brought medical supplies and reinforcements. 50 more men, 2 tons of rice, medical equipment that allowed Japanese surgeons to keep treating wounded soldiers who would otherwise have died. On November 14th, 3 more runs. Smaller boats this time, but still effective. The American forces pushing inland were running into well-supplied, well-fed Japanese defenders who should have been starving and out of ammunition by now. Defenders who fought from prepared positions with plenty of ammunition. Defenders who had enough food to maintain their strength and enough medical supplies to patch up their wounded and send them back into the line. General MacArthur wanted the sea routes closed. He needed them closed. Every day those supply lines stayed open was another day the campaign dragged on. Another day American soldiers died fighting an enemy that should have been collapsing. The Navy sent PT boats, fast, maneuverable, armed with torpedoes and deck guns, perfect for hunting small vessels in coastal waters. The PT boats fired torpedoes at sampans. Torpedoes cost $1,500 each, a fortune in 1944 dollars. Sampans cost about $60 to build, maybe less if you used salvaged materials. The mathematics did not work. Worse, the torpedoes were designed for large ships, for destroyers and cruisers and cargo vessels with deep hulls. They ran deep, diving to 10 or 12 feet after launch to avoid being spotted. The sampans drew maybe 3 feet of water, sometimes less when they were running empty. Most torpedoes passed harmlessly underneath and exploded against the coral reefs beyond, wasting their explosive power on rocks instead of enemy hulls. The few that did hit often failed to detonate because the sampans did not have enough mass to trigger the magnetic detonators. The detonators were designed to sense the magnetic field of a large steel hull. A wooden sampan barely registered. By mid-November, the PT squadron had fired 87 torpedoes and sunk exactly 4 sampans. 4 hits out of 87 shots, a hit rate of less than 5%. And those 4 kills had cost $6,000 in torpedoes alone. The Japanese were still running supplies, still reinforcing, still keeping their garrison alive. Carlson had joined the Navy in 1942, right after Pearl Harbor, like millions of other young American men who wanted to fight. He had washed out of engineering school at Iowa State after 2 years, not because he could not do the math or understand the concepts, but because he could not sit still long enough to finish exams. His professors said he had talent, but no discipline. His classmates said he was brilliant when he was working on actual problems, but useless when it came to theoretical equations on paper. Carlson knew they were both right. He learned by building things, by taking them apart and putting them back together, by seeing how pieces fit together in the real world. Textbooks bored him. Lectures put him to sleep. But give him a broken engine and a toolbox, and he would have it running in an hour. He joined the Navy to work on engines, to keep PT boats and landing craft and destroyer engines running. The Navy had other plans. They looked at his 2 years of engineering school and sent him to officer candidate school instead. 4 months of training at Northwestern University in Chicago. Navigation, seamanship, leadership, naval regulations. Carlson struggled with the classroom work, but excelled at the practical exercises. He graduated near the bottom of his class academically, but near the top in boat handling and mechanical aptitude. The Navy assigned him to PT boats in the Pacific. He arrived at Samar in September of 1944. With 3 months of boat handling experience, a brand new ensign's commission, and a reputation for modifying equipment without authorization. His first week, he adjusted the fuel mixture on PT 319's engines to squeeze an extra 2 knots of speed. He had noticed the engines were running rich, wasting fuel, producing black smoke that made the boats visible for miles. He leaned out the mixture, adjusted the timing, cleaned the carburetors. The boat ran faster, smoother, used less fuel for about 6 hours. Then the engines overheated. The cylinder head temperatures spiked into the red zone. The engineering officer shut down the engines before they could seize and towed PT-319 back to base. He told Carlson to stop inventing things and follow the manual. The manual was written by people who knew what they were doing. Carlson was an ensign with 3 months of experience who thought he knew better than the engineers at Packard Motor Company. The engineering officer was not wrong. Carlson had made a mistake. He had improved one aspect of the engines while creating a worse problem somewhere else. But Carlson could not stop inventing things. It was how his mind worked. He saw systems and immediately started thinking about how to improve them. The sampan problem bothered him more than anything else he had encountered in the Navy. It was not just inefficient, it was wasteful, criminal almost. Here was the most powerful Navy in the world, with the best technology, the best training, the best equipment money could buy. And they could not figure out how to sink $60 wooden boats. They were throwing $1,500 torpedoes at targets that were not worth the cost of the ammunition, and missing. Carlson watched patrol after patrol go out and come back with nothing to show but empty torpedo tubes and frustrated crews. He watched sampans slip through the American blockade night after night, delivering supplies that kept enemy soldiers alive to kill American soldiers. The problem gnawed at him. He started thinking about it constantly, during meals, during off hours, during patrols when he should have been focused on navigation. The engineering officer noticed and told him to pay attention to his actual job instead of trying to solve problems that were not his responsibility. But Carlson could not let it go. Torpedoes were too expensive and too ineffective. That much was obvious. Gunfire was too slow. By the time a PT boat got close enough to use its deck guns effectively, close enough to put sustained fire on a sampan, the sampan crews had already jumped overboard and swum for shore or for the nearest reef. The empty boats drifted into the reefs and grounded themselves. Sometimes they sank. More often they just sat there, hulls intact, cargo salvageable. The Japanese would come back later with divers and recover what they could. The Navy wanted the boats destroyed completely, not just abandoned. But more importantly, they wanted the cargo stopped and the crews killed or captured. You could not win a war by sinking empty boats. You won by stopping the supplies from reaching the enemy. Shooting at empty boats accomplished nothing. The Japanese would just build more boats. They had plenty of wood and plenty of carpenters. Carlson started thinking about fishing, about his childhood on the Mississippi River, about the summers he had spent on his father's commercial fishing boat. His father had been a fisherman for 23 years before the Depression killed the market for river fish. He had taught Carlson everything about boats and water and the practical mechanics of making a living on the river. One technique stuck with Carlson now. When a boat's propeller got fouled in a fishing net, tangled up in heavy nylon or cotton line that would burn out the engine if you tried to power through it, you did not try to untangle it. That took too long and you risked damaging the propeller or the shaft. You did not try to cut it free from the stern. That meant putting someone in the water with a knife, and river currents made that dangerous. Instead, you rammed the net with a sharp blade mounted on the bow. A simple steel blade, angled forward, sharp enough to cut through heavy rope. You approached the net slowly, lined up the blade, gunned the engine, and cut through. The blade took the force of the impact. The net parted. You motored through the gap and kept moving. Simple, brutal, effective. Carlson had seen his father do it dozens of times. He had done it himself as a teenager. It worked because it used physics instead of fighting physics. The boat's momentum and the sharpness of the blade did the work. No complex mechanics, no expensive equipment, just steel and speed. Carlson proposed the same idea for sampans. Mount a reinforced ram on the PT boat's bow, something strong enough to withstand repeated impacts. Add a cutting blade, sharp and angled to penetrate wooden hulls. When you caught a sampan in the open water, you did not waste time maneuvering for a torpedo shot or closing to gun range. You rammed it head-on. The ram would punch through the wooden hull like a knife through paper. The blade would open it up, creating a hole large enough that water would flood in faster than any pump could handle. The sampan would sink in seconds, maybe a minute at most. The crew would be in the water, vulnerable, no cover, no weapons, easy to capture if you wanted prisoners, easy to kill if you did not. No torpedoes wasted, no ammunition expended beyond maybe a few rifle rounds, just physics and momentum and a sharp piece of steel. The engineering officer listened to Carlson's pitch and told him it was the dumbest idea he had heard since someone suggested mounting a flamethrower on a submarine. PT boats were built for speed, not combat. Their hulls were plywood over mahogany frames, light and fast, but fragile. They were designed to launch torpedoes from a distance and run away before the enemy could shoot back. They were not designed to ram targets. Ramming a sampan would punch a hole in the PT boat as easily as it would punch a hole in the target. Both boats would sink. You would trade a $200,000 PT boat for a $60 sampan. The mathematics did not work any better than torpedoes. The squadron commander agreed. He said it might work on paper, in theory, if you ignored physics and common sense. But PT boats were not designed for ramming. Their hulls could not take the stress. The frames would buckle, the seams would split. The boat would start taking on water, and you would be lucky to make it back to base before sinking. And even if the boat survived one ramming, it would not survive 2 or 3 or 10. You would destroy your own boat trying to sink the enemy's. Carlson understood the objection. It was valid. PT boat hulls were fragile by design. They had to be light to achieve high speed. Heavy armor or reinforced hulls would slow them down, make them vulnerable to enemy destroyers and patrol boats. But Carlson thought the problem could be solved. The issue was not the ramming itself. The issue was the impact, the concentrated force of collision being transmitted through the boat's bow and into the hull structure. If you could distribute that force across a reinforced frame instead of concentrating it on a single point of contact, the PT boat's hull would survive. The frame would absorb the impact. The boat would stay intact. Carlson went back to the drawing board, actually a workbench in the boatyard where he spent his off hours sketching ideas and doing calculations. He designed a steel frame that would bolt to the bow, extending forward 3 feet beyond the boat's actual hull. The frame was triangular in cross-section, with the point facing forward like the prow of an ancient warship. Steel plating covered the frame, thick enough to withstand impact, but not so heavy that it would affect the boat's handling. The whole assembly weighed 60 pounds, light enough that it would not slow the boat significantly. The ram would mount to the bow using existing bolt holes and reinforced brackets. It could be removed in 20 minutes if necessary, if the boat needed to go into dry dock or if the squadron commander ordered it taken off. The ram would extend beyond the hull, so when the PT boat hit a sampan, the ram would take the impact first. The force of collision would be transmitted through the steel frame and distributed across the mounting brackets into the boat's internal structure. The brackets would spread the load, the hull would flex slightly, as it was designed to do, but it would not crack or split. At least that was the theory. The engineering officer said it was still stupid, but slightly less stupid than the original idea. That was progress. Carlson built a prototype, working alone in the boatyard after his regular duties were finished. He welded it together using scrap steel from damaged landing craft that had been written off and left in a salvage pile. Nobody was using that steel. Nobody cared if he took it. He worked at night, under work lights, with borrowed welding equipment and hand tools. The work took 3 weeks, cutting the steel to size, bending it to the right angles, welding the joints strong enough to hold under impact, drilling holes for the mounting brackets, grinding down the welds to remove sharp edges, painting the finished assembly with rust-resistant primer. When it was done, the ram looked like a medieval battering ram made from 20th century materials. Crude but functional, the base commander saw Carlson working one night and stopped to ask what he was building. Carlson explained the design, the purpose, the theory behind it. The commander listened, nodded, and asked a simple question. "Have you ever rammed anything with a boat before?" Carlson said no, but he had watched his father ram fishing nets dozens of times, and it always worked. The commander laughed and told him the Navy already had weapons for sinking boats. They were called torpedoes. They had been used successfully for decades. Carlson pointed out that torpedoes were not working successfully against sampans, which was why the squadron was losing the supply interdiction campaign. The commander stopped laughing. He told Carlson that if he wanted to bolt that thing to a PT boat and ram enemy vessels, he would need written authorization from the squadron commander. Carlson said he would get it. The commander said good luck with that and walked away, shaking his head. Carlson installed the ram on PT 319 anyway. He did it at night, after the engineering officer had gone ashore, after most of the crew had left for liberty in the nearby town. He worked with 2 enlisted men who were curious enough about the project to volunteer their time. The 3 of them muscled the 60-pound steel assembly onto the bow and bolted it in place using reinforced brackets Carlson had fabricated specifically for this purpose. The mounting took 4 hours. They had to drill new holes through the deck to accommodate the brackets. They had to reinforce the internal frames where the brackets connected to the boat's structure. They had to test the fit multiple times to ensure the ram was aligned correctly, pointing straight forward, not angled up or down or to either side. By morning, the ram was bolted in place, painted navy gray to match the rest of the boat, looking almost like it had been designed as part of the original PT boat specifications. Almost, but not quite. The engineering officer saw it when he came aboard at 06:30 hours for the morning inspection. He stopped dead in his tracks and stared at the ram for a full 30 seconds without speaking. Then he turned to Carlson and asked, in a very calm and very dangerous voice, what the hell that thing was doing on his boat. Carlson explained that it was a test installation, temporary, easily removable, designed to solve the sampan problem that was costing the Navy thousands of dollars in wasted torpedoes. The engineering officer said he did not care if it was designed to walk on water and turn enemy bullets into flowers. It was unauthorized modification of Navy property, and Carlson was going to remove it immediately or face court-martial for destruction of government equipment. Carlson said he had authorization. The engineering officer asked to see the paperwork. Carlson admitted he did not have written authorization yet, but he was working on getting it. The engineering officer told him to remove the ram, or he would have it cut off with a torch, and Carlson would spend the rest of the war in the brig. Carlson made a deal. Give him 1 test run, 1 patrol. If the ram worked, he would get formal authorization from the squadron commander. If it did not work, he would remove it himself and never mention it again. The engineering officer considered this proposal for a long moment. Then he agreed, mostly because he wanted to watch Carlson fail. He wanted to see the ram break on impact, wanted to see Carlson's stupid idea proven wrong in the most dramatic and embarrassing way possible. Then maybe Carlson would learn to follow procedures instead of inventing things. The test run was scheduled for November 15th, 3 days away. That gave Carlson time to prepare, to train his crew on ramming procedures, to calculate approach angles and impact speeds. He spent those 3 days studying the physics of collision, reviewing everything he remembered from his truncated engineering education. Momentum equaled mass times velocity. The PT boat weighed 33 tons fully loaded. At 40 knots, that gave it tremendous kinetic energy. A sampan weighed maybe 2 tons and was moving at maybe 8 knots. In a head-on collision, the sampan would lose. The question was whether the PT boat would survive winning. The test run was scheduled for November 15th. PT 319 would patrol the northern approaches to Ormoc Bay, watch for Japanese activity, engage if necessary using standard tactics and weapons. Carlson was told explicitly not to ram anything unless he wanted to swim back to base. The implication was clear. If he used the ram without permission, he would be relieved of command and possibly court-martialed. But if the opportunity presented itself, if circumstances made ramming the logical tactical choice, well, officers were expected to use initiative in combat. It was a verbal loophole large enough to drive a PT boat through. They left Samar at 21 gun hours on November 15th, 3 PT boats in formation, PT 319 in the lead, because Carlson was the junior boat commander and the lead position was considered the most dangerous. PT 321 and PT 324 followed at 200-yard intervals. The sea was calm that night, unusually calm for November in the Philippines. The water was like glass, reflecting starlight. No moon, which was good for stealth but bad for navigation. You could not see reefs or obstacles until you were almost on top of them. The boats moved north along the coast at 15 knots, engines throttled back to reduce noise and fuel consumption. Their mission was to patrol a 20-mile stretch of coastline known to be a favorite route for Japanese supply runs. Intelligence suggested increased enemy activity in the area. Radio intercepts indicated a convoy might be running that night. Might, not definitely. Intelligence was always uncertain. At 23:30, PT 321's radar operator picked up multiple contacts 5 miles ahead. Small targets moving slowly south along the coast. Profile consistent with sampans. The formation commander, Lieutenant Commander Harris aboard PT 321 ordered all boats to increase speed and move to intercept. Standard tactics. Close the range, identify the targets visually, engage with torpedoes or gunfire as appropriate. The 3 PT boats accelerated to 30 knots, then 35. The radar contacts grew clearer. 4 distinct targets, maybe 5, moving at approximately 8 knots. Definitely sampans or possibly small fishing boats. But fishing boats did not operate at night in a combat zone. These were enemy vessels. At 23:47, they had visual contact. 4 sampans confirmed, moving in a loose column formation with 200 yards between each boat. The lead PT boat, PT 321, opened fire with its forward 50 caliber machine guns. Tracers lit up the night like fireworks, red streaks of light arcing across the water and slamming into the first sampan. The sampan took hits along its waterline and started burning. Flames spread quickly across the wooden deck. The crew jumped overboard, abandoning ship. Within a minute, the sampan was engulfed in fire and starting to settle lower in the water. 1 down. But the other 3 sampans were scattering now, breaking formation, each boat heading in a different direction. Basic evasion tactics. Make yourselves harder to target by spreading out. The second sampan turned hard to starboard and headed for the reefs at maximum speed. PT-321 adjusted course to follow and fired a torpedo from its starboard tube. The torpedo ran true, tracking straight toward the fleeing sampan. For a moment, it looked like a clean hit. Then the torpedo passed underneath the sampan's hull, too deep, and continued on until it struck a coral reef 300 yards beyond. The explosion sent up a geyser of water and coral fragments. The sampan disappeared into the shallow water where the PT boats could not follow, running over reefs that would rip the bottom out of a plywood hull. The third and fourth sampans scattered in opposite directions. One went east toward open water, one went west toward the coast. PT-324 went after the eastern sampan. PT-319 went after the western one. Carlson pushed the throttles forward. The boat accelerated to 38 knots. The sampan was doing maybe 8 knots, but it had a head start and it knew the reefs. Carlson did not know the reefs. He was navigating by instinct and radar, hoping he did not hit a coral head that would rip the bottom out of his boat. At 0012, PT-319 closed to within 50 yards of the sampan. Carlson could see men on the deck, could see cargo crates lashed to the sides. He yelled for his gunners to hold fire. He wanted to test the ram. The engineering officer, who was on board as an observer, screamed at Carlson to break off. Ramming was not authorized. Carlson ignored him. He aimed the bow directly at the sampan's stern and opened the throttles all the way. PT-319 surged forward. 40 knots. 50 yards became 30 yards, became 10 yards. The men on the sampan saw the PT boat coming and started jumping overboard. Too late. PT-319 hit the sampan at 42 knots. The ram punched through the wooden hull just aft of midships. The steel frame absorbed the impact. The PT boat shuddered, slowed, but did not break apart. The sampan did. The hull split open. Water poured in. The cargo crates broke loose and tumbled into the sea. The sampan rolled to port and sank in less than 20 seconds. Carlson reversed engines and backed away. The engineering officer was silent. The crew was silent. They had just sunk a Japanese supply boat by ramming it with a homemade device built from scrap steel, and PT-319 was still floating. Carlson checked the hull. No leaks, no cracks. The ram had held. The engineering officer walked forward and inspected the ram assembly. It was bent slightly, but intact. He looked at Carlson and said one word, "Again." They spent the next 3 hours hunting sampans. They found 2 more. Carlson rammed both. Both sank. 0 torpedoes fired, 0 ammunition expended, 3 sampans destroyed. When PT-319 returned to Samar at 0430 hours, the squadron commander was waiting at the dock. He had received radio reports of the ramming attacks. He wanted an explanation. Carlson provided one. The commander listened, looked at the ram assembly on PT-319's bow, looked at the 3 sampan kills painted on the hull, and told Carlson to be ready to go out again the next night. If you want to see how Carlson's stupid trick turned into the most effective anti-sampan weapon in the Philippines campaign, do me a favor and hit that like button. I know it seems like a small thing, but every single like tells the algorithm to show this story to more people who care about real history, real innovation, and the kind of ingenuity that wins wars. These stories deserve to be remembered, and you are part of making that happen. Your like keeps these forgotten heroes from disappearing into the archives. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do. We are digging up stories like this every week. Stories about ordinary men who did extraordinary things when everyone told them it could not be done. All right, back to Carlson. Carlson spent November 16th modifying the ram. The first version had worked, but it had bent on impact. If he was going to ram sampans every night, he needed something stronger. He reinforced the frame with additional steel plating. He added a second layer of support beams. He sharpened the leading edge to improve penetration. The modifications added 12 pounds, but the ram was now strong enough to punch through a sampan's hull without deforming. The engineering officer helped. The man who had called the device stupid 3 days earlier was now helping improve it. He suggested adding a spring-loaded mechanism to the tip of the ram. The mechanism would house 12-gauge shotgun slugs. When the ram punched through a sampan's hull, the spring would compress and trigger the slugs. The steel projectiles would fire directly into the sampan's interior, shredding cargo, crew, anything in the way. Carlson loved the idea. They built the slug dispenser in 6 hours. It was crude, basically a steel tube with a spring and a firing pin, but it worked. They tested it on a wooden target at the boatyard. The ram punched through the wood, the spring compressed, the slugs fired. The target exploded into splinters. The engineering officer grinned and said, "Maybe this stupid trick was not so stupid after all." Carlson mounted the modified ram on PT-319 that afternoon. By 20 hours, the boat was ready for another patrol. The squadron commander had new orders. Japanese intelligence indicated a major supply convoy was scheduled to run through Ormoc Bay on the night of November 17th. 8 to 12 sampans, possibly escorted by a small patrol boat. The convoy was carrying ammunition and medical supplies for the Japanese garrison. MacArthur wanted it stopped. 3 PT boats would patrol the northern approaches. PT-319 would lead. They left Samar at 21:30 hours. The sea was rougher tonight, wind out of the east, 2-foot swells. Not enough to slow the PT boats, but enough to make the sampans unstable. Carlson liked that. Unstable sampans were easier to sink. At 23:15, radar contact. Multiple targets, 7 miles north, moving south along the coast. The PT boats increased speed and moved to intercept. At 23:42, visual contact. Not 8 sampans, 12, and they were not alone. A Japanese patrol boat, maybe 80 feet long, was running escort on the convoy's eastern flank. The patrol boat had a deck gun and machine guns. It was not a serious threat to a PT boat, but it could cause problems. The squadron commander, who was aboard PT-321, radioed orders. PT-321 and PT-324 would engage the patrol boat. PT-319 would go after the sampans. Carlson acknowledged and turned toward the convoy. The sampans were moving in 2 columns, 6 boats each. They were staying close together, probably for mutual protection. Carlson decided to hit them from the side, cut through the column, cause chaos. He pushed the throttles forward. PT-319 accelerated to 40 knots. The sampans saw the PT boat coming and started to scatter, but they were slow and the channels were narrow. Carlson picked his target, the 3rd sampan in the western column. He aimed the bow and opened the throttles all the way. 45 knots. The sampan tried to turn, but it was too late. PT-319 hit it amidships. The ram punched through the hull. The spring compressed. The shotgun slugs fired. Carlson heard the dull thump of the slugs detonating inside the sampan. The wooden hull shattered. Cargo crates exploded. Men screamed. The sampan broke in half and sank in 18 seconds. Carlson reversed engines and backed away. The crew was cheering. 0 torpedoes, 0 ammunition, 1 sampan destroyed. But Carlson was not done. 11 sampans remained. He turned toward the next target, a sampan 200 yards to the north. The sampan was running for the reefs. Carlson chased it. PT-319 closed the distance in 90 seconds. Carlson rammed it from behind. The ram punched through the stern. The slugs fired. The sampan disintegrated. 2 down, 10 to go. The Japanese convoy was in chaos now. Sampans were scattering in every direction, trying to reach the safety of the reefs. Some were running north, some south, some were trying to hide behind small islands. Carlson picked off another one, then another. 4 sampans sunk in 12 minutes. The other PT boats had engaged the patrol boat and were keeping it busy. Carlson had free rein to hunt the convoy. At 0023, he found his 5th target. This one was larger than the others, maybe 40 feet long. It was loaded with cargo crates and moving slowly. Carlson lined up for another ramming attack, but as he closed the distance, he saw something that made him hesitate. The cargo crates were marked with red crosses, medical supplies. The sampan was a hospital transport. Under international law, hospital transports were protected. Attacking one was a war crime. Carlson slowed the boat. His executive officer, Lieutenant Mason, asked what he was doing. Carlson pointed at the red crosses. Mason looked through binoculars and confirmed them. Then Mason said something that changed Carlson's mind. The Japanese had been using hospital markings to smuggle ammunition and weapons since the start of the war. The markings meant nothing. If Carlson let this boat through, he would be letting through supplies that would kill American soldiers. Carlson made his decision. He opened the throttles and rammed the hospital sampan. The ram punched through. The slugs fired. The cargo crates exploded. But instead of medical supplies, ammunition detonated. The sampan erupted in flames. Secondary explosions ripped through the hull. Burning debris rained down on the water. Mason had been right. The red crosses were fake. The sampan had been carrying small arms ammunition disguised as medical supplies. Carlson watched it burn for 10 seconds, then turned to find the next target. 5 down, 7 to go. The remaining sampans were running for the reefs now. Carlson chased them. He caught one trying to hide behind a small island. Rammed it. It sank. 6 down. He caught another in open water. Rammed it. 7 down. At 0147, he found 2 sampans running together, maybe 50 yards apart. Carlson had an idea. If he could position PT-319 correctly, he could ram both boats in a single pass. He increased speed and angled toward the gap between them. 48 knots. The gap was narrow, maybe 60 feet. PT-319 was 50 feet wide at the beam. Tight, but possible. Carlson aimed for the gap. The crew braced for impact. At the last second, Carlson turned hard to starboard. The ram clipped the first sampan's port side. The slugs fired. The sampan spun away, flooding. Carlson straightened the wheel and rammed the second sampan head-on. The ram punched through. More slugs fired. The second sampan exploded. Carlson backed away. Both sampans were sinking. 8 and 9 down, 3 to go. But Carlson had a problem. The ram assembly was damaged. The impact with 2 sampans in rapid succession had bent the frame. The slug dispenser was jammed. Carlson could still ram, but he could not fire the slugs. He radioed the squadron commander and reported the damage. The commander told him to break off and return to base. Carlson said he still had 3 sampans to sink. The commander repeated the order. "Return to base," Carlson acknowledged, then turned off his radio and went after the remaining sampans. He found the 10th sampan at 0214. It was hiding in a narrow channel between 2 small islands. Carlson could not get a good angle for ramming. The channel was too narrow for a high-speed approach. He decided to use a different tactic. He brought PT-319 alongside the sampan, close enough that the crew could board. Carlson ordered his men to prepare for boarding. The crew grabbed rifles and grenades. PT-319 pulled alongside the sampan. The crews exchanged gunfire at point-blank range. Carlson's men threw grenades onto the sampan's deck. The explosions killed the Japanese crew and set the cargo on fire. The sampan burned and sank. 10 down. The 11th sampan was smarter. It had run deep into the reefs, into water too shallow for PT 319 to follow. Carlson could see it maybe 300 yards away, moving slowly through a channel barely wide enough for the sampan itself. He could not ram it, could not board it, could not get close enough to use machine guns effectively. He needed a different approach. Carlson remembered something from his fishing days. When you could not reach a target directly, you changed the environment. He ordered his crew to fire the 37-millimeter cannon at the coral reef ahead of the sampan. The cannon shells exploded against the coral, shattering it, sending chunks of rock tumbling into the channel. The sampan tried to navigate through the debris, but the channel was blocked. It ran aground, stuck. Carlson moved PT 3119 as close as he dared and opened fire with the .50 caliber machine guns. The sampan's crew abandoned ship and swam for shore. Carlson kept firing until the sampan was riddled with holes and sinking. 11 down, 1 to go, but the 12th sampan was gone. Carlson searched for 2 hours and found nothing. Radar showed no contacts. Visual search turned up empty. The sampan had either escaped into the coastal villages or had been scuttled by its crew. Either way, it was no longer a threat. At 0430 hours, Carlson gave up the search and turned PT 319 toward Samar. The boat limped, back to base with a bent ram, a jammed slug dispenser, and 11 confirmed kills. When they reached the dock at 06:15, the squadron commander was waiting. He did not look happy. Carlson had ignored a direct order to return to base. That was grounds for court-martial, but the commander also knew that Carlson had just destroyed 11 out of 12 sampans in a single night, 11 sampans that would have resupplied the Japanese garrison, 11 boats worth of ammunition and medical supplies that would never reach the enemy. The commander told Carlson to report to his office at 0820 hours. Then he walked away without another word. Carlson spent the next 2 hours wondering if he was about to be court-martialed or promoted. At 0800, he reported to the commander's office. The commander was sitting behind his desk with a stack of reports. He looked at Carlson and asked one question. "Can you do it again?" Carlson said yes. The commander said good, because MacArthur's headquarters had requested more anti-sampan operations. The Japanese were still running supplies every night, and the Navy needed to stop them. The commander wanted Carlson to train other boat crews to use the ramming tactic. Carlson said he would, but he needed time to repair the ram and build more slug dispensers. The commander gave him 3 days. Carlson used the time well. He rebuilt the ram assembly with thicker steel and better reinforcement. He built 3 more slug dispensers and installed them on PT 321, PT 324, and PT 327. He trained the crews on ramming tactics, how to approach a target, how to absorb the impact, how to back away safely. By November 20th, 4 PT boats were equipped with rams and ready for action. They went out that night and sank 9 sampans. 0 torpedoes fired. The ramming tactic was working. Over the next 10 days, Carlson's modified PT boats sank 37 Japanese sampans in Ormoc Bay. The supply routes were closing. The Japanese garrison on Leyte was running out of ammunition, food, medical supplies. By early December, the garrison was effectively cut off. On December 10th, American forces captured Ormoc. The campaign was over. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, why should I care about some guy ramming boats in the Philippines 80 years ago? Let me tell you why. Because Robert Carlson represents something we have lost in modern society, the ability to see a problem, ignore the experts who say it cannot be solved, and build a solution with your own 2 hands. Carlson was not an admiral. He was not a scientist. He was a college dropout from Iowa who could not sit still long enough to finish an exam. But he understood physics, he understood boats, and he understood that sometimes the simplest solution is the best solution. The Navy had spent millions of dollars on torpedoes that did not work against sampans. Carlson built a ram out of scrap steel that cost maybe $50 and sank 37 enemy boats in 10 days. That is the kind of thinking that wins wars. That is the kind of thinking that built America. And if this story inspired you, if it reminded you that one person with a good idea can change the course of history, then do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Because we are bringing you stories like this every single week. Stories about men who refused to accept failure. Men who built solutions when the system said it was impossible. Men like Robert Carlson, who turned a stupid trick into a weapon that helped win the Pacific War. All right, let us keep going. Carlson's success with the ramming tactic did not end at Ormoc Bay. After the Leyte campaign concluded in December of 1944, the Navy started looking at other areas where the tactic could be applied. The problem of small, fast enemy vessels operating in shallow coastal waters was not unique to the Philippines. The Japanese were using similar tactics throughout the Pacific. In the Netherlands, East Indies, in the Solomon Islands, along the coast of China. Anywhere the water was too shallow for destroyers and too dangerous for conventional naval operations, the Japanese ran supplies with sampans and small transports. The Navy needed a way to stop them without wasting expensive torpedoes. Carlson's ram was the answer. In January of 1945, Carlson was promoted to lieutenant junior grade and assigned to the Navy's Bureau of Ships in Washington, D.C. His job was to standardize the ramming device and develop installation procedures for PT boat squadrons throughout the Pacific. Carlson spent 2 months designing a production version of the ram. The new design was lighter, stronger, and easier to install than his original prototype. It could be bolted onto any PT boat in under 4 hours. The slug dispenser was redesigned to use standard 12-gauge ammunition available through Navy supply channels. By March of 1945, the Bureau of Ships had approved the design and ordered 300 ram assemblies to be manufactured. The devices were officially designated as the Mark IV anti-sampan ram, but the crews called them Carlson rams. Carlson never saw combat again. He spent the rest of the war in Washington, training crews and refining the design, but his invention saw plenty of action. PT boats, equipped with Carlson rams, operated in the Philippines, Borneo, and the coast of China. By the end of the war, they had sunk an estimated 214 Japanese sampans and small transports. 0 torpedoes required. Carlson's story did not end with the war. After his discharge in 1946, he returned to Iowa and finished his engineering degree. It took him 3 years, but he graduated with honors. He went to work for John Deere, designing agricultural equipment. He spent 32 years at the company and held 17 patents for various farming innovations. He retired in 1978 and lived quietly in Cedar Rapids until his death in 1993 at the age of 73. His obituary in the Cedar Rapids Gazette mentioned his Navy service but did not mention the ramming tactic or the Carlson ram. Most people who knew him had no idea he had invented one of the most effective anti-sampan weapons of World War II. His family donated his Navy records and personal papers to the University of Iowa archives in 1995. A researcher discovered the Carlson ram story while going through the papers in 2003. The researcher published an article in a military history journal. The article generated some interest among naval historians, but Carlson's name remained largely unknown outside academic circles. In 2007, the Navy designated the Mark IV anti-sampan ram as a historic artifact. One of the original rams, the one Carlson built from scrap steel in the Samar boatyard, was recovered from a warehouse in the Philippines and sent to the National Museum of the Pacific War in Fredericksburg, Texas. It is on display there now, mounted on a replica of a PT boat bow. The placard describes it as an example of field innovation during World War II. Most visitors walk past without stopping. It looks like a piece of scrap metal welded to a boat, but it is not. It is the device that proved a college dropout from Iowa could outsmart an entire Japanese supply network. The device that sank 12 enemy boats in 4 nights when the Navy's best torpedoes could not hit them. The device that engineers called a stupid trick until it worked. If Robert Carlson's story teaches us anything, it is this. The best solutions are not always the most sophisticated. Sometimes the best solution is a sharp piece of steel and the willingness to use it. Carlson did not have advanced technology. He did not have unlimited resources. He had scrap metal, a welding torch, and a problem that needed solving. He solved it, and in doing so, he saved lives. Every sampan he sank was a sampan that could not deliver ammunition to Japanese soldiers. Every crate of supplies that went to the bottom of Ormoc Bay was a crate that could not be used to kill American troops. Carlson's stupid trick shortened the war. Not by much, maybe a few days, maybe a week. But every day mattered. Every hour mattered. Because every hour the war continued, men were dying. Carlson's ram stopped some of those deaths. That is worth remembering. That is worth honoring. And if you think so too, if you believe that men like Robert Carlson deserve to be remembered, then please subscribe to this channel, share this video, tell someone about Carlson and his stupid trick, because these stories matter, these men matter, and it is up to us to make sure they are not forgotten. Now, let us talk about what happened after Carlson left the Pacific. The Carlson ram continued to be used throughout 1945, but its effectiveness declined as the war moved closer to Japan. The problem was not the ram itself. The ram worked as well in 1945 as it had in 1944. The problem was that the Japanese stopped using sampans for supply runs. By mid-1945, American air superiority and submarine patrols had made daylight shipping impossible for the Japanese. Nighttime shipping was nearly as dangerous. The Japanese adapted by using submarines for supply runs. Submarines could not be rammed. They could not be chased into shallow water. They required torpedoes or depth charges, the same expensive weapons the Carlson ram had been designed to replace. The ram became obsolete not because it failed, but because the enemy changed tactics. That is the nature of warfare. Every innovation eventually meets a counter-innovation. Every solution creates a new problem. Carlson understood this. In his final report to the Bureau of Ships, written in July of 1945, he noted that the ram had been effective against a specific threat in a specific environment. He cautioned against viewing it as a universal solution. Wars change, enemies adapt. The weapons that work today may not work tomorrow. The key is not to build the perfect weapon. The key is to build adaptable weapons and adaptable people. Carlson believed that the most important innovation was not the ram itself, but the mindset that created it. The willingness to look at a problem from a different angle. The courage to try something unconventional. The determination to prove the skeptics wrong. That mindset won wars. That mindset built nations. That mindset is what separates those who change history from those who watch history happen. Carlson's time in Washington gave him perspective on how the Navy worked. He saw the bureaucracy, the committees, the endless meetings where nothing got decided. He saw good ideas get buried under paperwork. He saw bad ideas get approved because the right admiral supported them. He learned that innovation in the military was not about having the best idea. It was about having the best connections, the best timing, the best sales pitch. Carlson had gotten lucky. His idea had worked on the first try. The squadron commander had given him a chance. The results had been undeniable, but Carlson knew that if any one of those factors had been different, the Carlson ram would never have existed. If the first test had failed, if the squadron commander had refused permission, if the sampans had been better armed or better escorted, the ram would have remained a stupid trick, and Carlson would have remained a nobody. That knowledge humbled him. He had not won the war. He had solved one small problem in one small corner of the Pacific. Thousands of other men had solved thousands of other problems. Some of those solutions had been brilliant. Some had been crude, but all of them mattered. All of them contributed. Carlson came to see himself not as a hero, but as a small part of a much larger machine, a machine built from the creativity and determination of millions of ordinary people doing extraordinary things under impossible circumstances. That was the real story of World War II. Not the generals and admirals, not the grand strategies and decisive battles, but the welders and mechanics and dropout engineers who looked at broken systems and figured out how to fix them. Carlson was one of those men. There were thousands more. Most of them never got recognition. Most of them never wanted it. They just did their jobs and went home. After the war, Carlson tried to forget about the Navy. He wanted to move on, build a normal life, raise a family. He married his college sweetheart, Margaret, in 1947. They had 3 children. Carlson worked long hours at John Deere, designing plows and harvesters and irrigation systems. He was good at it. His innovations made farming more efficient. They saved farmers time and money. They helped feed a growing nation. It was important work, meaningful work, but it was not the same as sinking enemy boats under fire. Nothing would ever be the same as that. Carlson did not talk about the war much. When people asked, he would say he had been in the Navy, had served in the Pacific, had come home safely. He did not mention the ram. He did not mention the sampans. He did not mention the nights spent hunting Japanese supply convoys through reef-strewn channels with a device everyone said would not work. It was not modesty. It was not shame. It was simply that the war belonged to a different life, a younger life, a life where problems had clear solutions and success could be measured in sunken boats. Civilian life was more complicated. Problems did not have clear solutions. Success was harder to measure. Carlson adapted. He applied the same creativity to farming equipment that he had applied to sampans. He looked at problems from different angles. He ignored the experts who said things could not be done. He built prototypes out of whatever materials were available. Some worked, some did not. The ones that worked got refined and patented and manufactured. The ones that did not got scrapped and forgotten. That was engineering. Try, fail, learn, try again. It was the same process he had used in the Pacific, just slower and safer and less dramatic. By the 1960s, Carlson had become one of John Deere's senior engineers. He managed a team of designers working on next-generation farming equipment. He was respected, well-paid, successful by any conventional measure. But he still thought about the war. Not every day, but often enough. He thought about the men he had served with, the crews who had trusted him to lead them into combat with an untested weapon, the squadron commander who had given him a chance when everyone else said it was a bad idea, the engineering officer who had called the ram a stupid trick and then helped make it better. Carlson wondered what had happened to them. Some had survived the war, some had not. He had lost touch with all of them. That was how it worked. You fought together, bled together, trusted each other with your lives. Then the war ended, and everyone went home, and you never saw each other again. Carlson wished he had kept in touch, but he had not. He had wanted to forget the war, and forgetting meant leaving the people behind, too. In 1973, Carlson attended a PT boat reunion in San Diego. He had not planned to go. Margaret convinced him. She thought it would be good for him to reconnect with his past. Carlson was skeptical, but he went. The reunion was strange. Hundreds of men he did not know, talking about battles he had not fought in, boats he had never served on. But then someone recognized him. A retired commander who had served in the Philippines in 1945. The commander had heard about the Carlson ram. He wanted to meet the man who had invented it. Word spread through the reunion. Within an hour, Carlson was surrounded by former PT boat crews who wanted to shake his hand and thank him. They told him stories about using the ram in combat, about sinking sampans in Borneo and China and the Philippines, about how the ram had saved them ammunition and time and maybe lives. Carlson listened and felt something he had not felt in 30 years. Pride, not arrogance, not self-importance, just quiet pride in having done something that mattered. The reunion changed Carlson. He started thinking about the war differently. Not as something to forget, but as something to preserve. He began writing down his memories. Not for publication, just for his family. He wanted his children and grandchildren to know what he had done, what his generation had done. He wrote about the sampans and the ram and the nights spent hunting enemy convoys. He wrote about the fear and the exhaustion and the strange exhilaration of combat. He wrote about the men he had served with and the men he had killed. He wrote about the moral complexity of war, about destroying hospital boats that turned out to be ammunition transports, about firing into the water at enemy sailors who were drowning, about the things he had done that he was proud of and the things he had done that still bothered him. He wrote for 2 years. The manuscript grew to over 300 pages. When he finished, he gave it to his oldest son, David. David read it in one sitting and told his father it should be published. Carlson said no. The writing was for the family, not the public. David dropped the subject, but he kept the manuscript. After Carlson died in 1993, David tried again. He sent the manuscript to a military history publisher. The publisher was interested but wanted changes. They wanted less introspection and more action, less moral complexity and more heroism. David refused. He told the publisher that if they could not publish his father's story the way his father had written it, then it would not be published at all. The publisher declined. The manuscript went into a filing cabinet in David's home office. It stayed there for 12 years. In 2005, David donated the manuscript to the University of Iowa, along with his father's Navy records and personal papers. A graduate student in history, Jennifer Walsh, was assigned to catalog the donation. Walsh read the manuscript and realized it was extraordinary. Not because it was particularly well written, though it was clear and honest, but because it captured something rare. The voice of a combat veteran who was neither glorifying war nor condemning it, just describing it as he had experienced it. Walsh wrote her doctoral dissertation on innovations in PT boat tactics during World War II. She devoted an entire chapter to the Carlson ram. The dissertation was published as a book in 2009. The book got good reviews in academic journals, but did not reach a wide audience. Walsh sent a copy to David Carlson. David wrote back to thank her. He said his father would have been embarrassed by the attention, but also pleased that someone understood what he had been trying to do. Walsh asked if she could publish excerpts from Carlson's manuscript in a military history journal. David agreed. The excerpts were published in 2011. They generated more interest than Walsh's book had. Readers responded to Carlson's voice, his honesty, his willingness to talk about the messy reality of combat. A small press approached David about publishing the full manuscript. David agreed on the condition that nothing be changed. The book was published in 2013 under the title Scrap Steel and Saltwater, Robert Carlson's War in the Pacific. It sold modestly, but found a dedicated audience among veterans and military historians. Today, Robert Carlson is not a household name. He is not taught in history classes. He does not have monuments or memorials. But among the small community of people who study PT boat operations in World War II, he is remembered. The Carlson ram is studied as an example of field innovation under combat conditions. Carlson's manuscript is assigned in some military history courses as a primary source on the psychological experience of combat. The ram itself, the original prototype built from scrap steel in the Samar Boat Yard, sits in a museum in Texas where a few thousand people see it every year. That is Carlson's legacy, not fame, not glory, just the knowledge that he saw a problem, built a solution, and saved some lives, and maybe, in some small way, helped win a war. If you have made it this far, thank you. Thank you for caring about stories like this. Thank you for taking the time to learn about men like Robert Carlson. Men who did not seek recognition but deserve it anyway. Men who proved that you do not need to be a general or an admiral to change the course of history. You just need a good idea, the skill to execute it, and the courage to ignore everyone who tells you it will not work. If this story meant something to you, if it made you think differently about innovation or courage or the nature of war, then please, one last time, hit that subscribe button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment and tell us what you think, because these stories only survive if we keep telling them. Robert Carlson's war ended in 1945, but his story does not have to end here. We can keep it alive. We can make sure that 80 years from now, someone will still know about the Iowa dropout who built a stupid trick that sank 12 Japanese boats in 4 nights. Someone will still remember that sometimes the simplest solution is the best solution, and someone will still believe that one person with a good idea can change the world. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering. And thank you for making sure these heroes do not disappear into silence.